Welcome to Thursday night class. We're in Parshas Ve'era now, and we're getting close to the Exodus, the going out of Mitzrayim. And the purpose of the going out of Egypt was to receive the Torah. And that we're going to learn about in a few weeks, and about a month from now. Parshas Yisro is going to be the Parsha of the giving of the Torah. This discourse that we're going to learn is a discourse that discusses the unbelievable greatness of the Torah and of Torah study, what happens when we study Torah. It's based off a verse in the Song of Songs, which I know despite the title of today's class is called 60 Queens, 80 Concubines, Young Women Without Number. So I don't want to disappoint anybody who's coming to the class who's going to think that I'm talking about queens and concubines and young women. That's not going to be the subject of this class. There's enough stuff on YouTube which you can watch if you're interested in that. We're going to be talking about God and our unique relationship with Him. And yes, somehow in the midst of this deep and boundless discussion about God and His relationship with us, we're going to appreciate the significance of the 60 queens, the 80 concubines, and the young women in terms of various different channels in which God manifests Himself and is intimate with, in which each and every one of us is able to position ourselves to be either the queen or in the state of the concubine or the girls without a number and achieve that type of connection. So let's first take a look at the verse. The verse is in Song of Songs. And by the way, if you were intrigued by the subject matter and you came on for that reason, maybe God sent you here because you'll learn a little bit about God, about what's really real in this world, and what's truly meaningful and godly in this world, and even if it happened by accident. So welcome to a godly journey into some very, very deep place of truth. So the verse in Psalm says like this. Not in Psalms, in Songs of Songs, talking about we know that the Song of Songs is really a love song, but it's meant to be a metaphor. It's this love poetic piece that is describing this romantic experience between a woman and a man. And it's meant to be a metaphor for the love of God and Israel, God and the Jewish people. So towards the end in chapter 6, no, let me see if it's still chapter 6. Yeah, it's the last verse. Am I correct? Yeah. No, it's not the last verse. It's chapter 6, verse 8. Perek Vav, Pasuk Zayin. It says, Shisha Heimo Melochos. There are 60 queens. Ushmoinim Pelakshim. There are 80 concubines. So you can learn that this is referring to King Solomon was the one who wrote this piece of poetry. Ancient kings, the ancient kings used to have lots of wives. There were many women. Kings had many women. So you can say that King Solomon had 60 queens, which meant, we know that he married 1,000 women, 1,000 wives. So why are we referring? So that's why it's hard to say that this is referring to King Solomon. But in any ways, let's look at it as a king. Someone who can afford the credit card bills when he has 60 queens. And then he has 80. So what is a concubine? Concubine is a very distasteful term these days. Obviously, it seems like. But the idea is it's a wife, but not with the full status of wife. It would be secondary type of wife. Like Rashi says, a pelegesh is that she doesn't have a ketubah, which which means which upgrades the relationship, where the woman has far more status. And a concubine would mean a woman with less status in the relationship. And so a king, because he's the king, so he has 60 wives, primary wives. He has 80. Again, why these numbers? That's not exactly explained now. Maybe we will come across that in the discourse. The 80 concubines, and the young girls without a number are referring to those that are not married to the king, but yet they're kind of perhaps would like to be, like by the story of Achashverosh, where the girls were selected to come and to um, to be potential wives. In other words, for the king, the entire kingdom is available, right? But yet, what does the king say? King says, I have so many women, but you know what? Achasi anasi. I have one that is my designated wife. She's my love, and that's the one that I love, and she is my. In other words, notwithstanding the 60 and the 80 and the availability of all the girls, the verse continues, Achasi ainasi, my dove, which is an affectionate way of saying my love. She is one. She's one and singular. Tamasi, she is faultless. She's perfect. Achasi li'ima, she is singular to her mother. That means she's like a one of a kind. Barahi leyoladita, she's pure to the one who gave birth to her. Ra'uhu banais v'yashruha, girls see her and praise her or certify her. Because whenever sees her, they say, oh, she is something else. She's completely different. Melochos upelakshim, the queens and the concubines, when they see her, they all admit that she's extraordinary. The hallelujah, they praise her. So this is meant to be a metaphor how God chooses Israel, the Jewish people, and says, with all the others, with everything else that exists on all levels of existence, but yet, what is special to Hashem are the Jewish people. And that's Hashem says, you're mine. You're where my heart is. Beautiful to hear. Now, there is a midrash that tells us that this verse, which says that, speaks about the 60 wives and the 80 concubines and the girls without an end, in addition to the meaning that it's referring to, and then there is the one, which is referring to Israel, the Jewish people, God's primary wife. But the Midrash tells us that this is referring to God's relationship with the Torah. The 60 wives, the 60 queens that there are, which order them have a status of a full-fledged wife, are referring to the 60 Masechtos of Mishnah. In the Mishnah, the oral law is divided into six groups, and in each group there are Masechtas, but it turns out altogether there are 60 tractates of Mishnah. And then the 80 concubines, the Midrash tells us, is referring to what's called the Brisa. So those who were here on Tuesday night, we discussed this. Not me, it was Rabbi Ganuth who gave a phenomenal class. He discussed the concept of Mishnah and Brisa. So Mishnah are the primary laws and teachings that make up the primary code of Jewish law in all aspects of the commandments, which make up the skeleton of the Talmud, the inner bones of the Talmud, is the Mishnah, which was authored by Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who lived about close to 100 years after the destruction of the temple, in which all the teachings that were taught Because see, when God gave the Torah, God gave us the the scripture, the 5 books of Moses, where he gives us a very general commandments, but he doesn't explain. Like he says, keep the Shabbos, but he doesn't say how to keep Shabbos, or very vaguely telling us mitzvahs. But then you have the oral law, which came. So it was a tradition handed down, and it was studied with rabbi, student, and certain things they had to figure out. Rabbi Genuth spoke about speaking to the Kohen, the Urim V'Tumim, having certain divine communication and getting inspiration to be able to understand what God's will is. However the system was, there were these many, many teachings floating around which were not written. When we say they weren't written, means they weren't written in an official book. People jotted down. Maimonides says people would jot down for themselves, like manuscripts of their own, what they received from their rabbis, but there wasn't an official document. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi came and gathered all, when he saw that the Jewish people were going into exile, and he saw that the great yeshivot and the great rabbis will not be as accessible like it was when Jews were more clustered in one place. So it was a great danger that these teachings would get lost and forgotten, and then Jews would not know how to practice Judaism. So we needed to keep the Torah and the halacha, the laws of Torah intact. He gathered together all the great rabbis of his time, brought them to one place, to a yeshiva, and he basically downloaded from everybody, what do you have? Give me your teachings. What do you have? He received all this information from all these, everybody had their traditions, what they heard. This one studied by this one studied by that one, this one studied by that one. He had these things. And he took them all in and he filtered through. He filtered all this information. From his filtering of all this information, he was able to gather the primary, what he saw as the most reliable of the reliable. Or as Rabbi Genuth put it, he was able to take the general principles out from the actual story. That was an interesting interpretation. But the simple understanding of it is that by him investigating what you said, he received what was the clearest, what he can see was considered what is the purest of the pure. And that he included in the Mishnah. Even over there's a lot of arguments between the sages, but he included and condensed it compiled it into an official book that would later be copied, and everybody would have that one book of the basic infrastructure of the will of God in terms of observance of mitzvot. And they are 60 tractates covering all aspects of Jewish law, from finance to the laws of purity and impurity, ritual impurity and purity, like all aspects. Agriculture, mitzvot of the land, each one has its own section. The mitzvot that relate to holidays, holiday observance. Now, so the Mishnah is the Mishnah, but then there were all these, while they were compiling this, all these teachings that came along. Let's say you had, I'm just going to throw out a number, 30,000 or 50,000 individual teachings, probably much more than that. I don't know. I have no idea what it is. Let's say 80,000. Let's take a number 80. 80,000, because that's what it is, of various different teachings. And he compiles the Mishnah and includes about 30,000 of it, which he kind of feels is the most inner, clearest description of what was the most reliable. So there's 50,000 that never made it into the Mishnah. But they're still teachings of great rabbis who heard them from their rabbis. So that remained kind of, now that it was compiled, it was kind of floating around, even though it wasn't in the Mishnah. And people had those documents, and they were called brises. The literal meaning of brisa means that which is outside. It didn't make it into the inside Mishnah. It remains outside. Now, interesting is, how do we know about most of these brises? The way these brises come to us is when the Talmud later is about 100, 200 years later. The rabbis are now studying the Mishnah, and they're trying to decodify the Mishnah. The Mishnah was written in a very concise and short and compressed language, and every word contains in it, so much nuances in which we can derive from its major principles the ramifications. So the Talmud wants to take the Mishnah and kind of break it up to figure out like what's really there. What does the Mishnah intend with this? Why did it say it this way? And what the Talmud does is, in order to clarify the Mishnah, the Talmud will bring out the brises. The Talmud does a comparative analysis between the Mishnah and the Bryce. So it says in the Mishnah so and so, and it says Rabbi Yeshua. In the Mishnah it says Rabbi Yeshua taught so and so. So one of the rabbis of the Talmud is going to say, well, hold it. You say Rabbi Yeshua said like this. I have a brisa which says Rabbi Yeshua says the opposite. So the Talmud will say, hold it. If the Mishnah says like this in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, and we have a brisa, now the brises we can rely on. It's just not as so when we have the two. So if we find out there's no way to reconcile it, and there's a contradiction between the Mishnah and the brisa, the Mishnah wins hand down, because we say the Mishnah is stronger than the brisa. But most of the time, the Talmud doesn't want to cross out X the brisa. Probably, if you look at the nuance, you can see that the brisa is talking in this case. They look the same. They're not. It's not like Rabbi Yeshua is the two students, or we have a confused message over here of what Rabbi Yeshua's opinion was, permitted or not permitted. It's just if you look carefully in the words, you can see Rabbi Yeshua is referring to, in this case, in the Brisa, he's referring to that case. And over here, it's slightly different, and the slight nuance that's different changes the law. So by the Talmud doing all these comparative analysis between Mishnahs, and sometimes for every Mishnah, the Talmud will find 6 or 7 different Brisas that are, sometimes the Brisa, sometimes the Brisas were written not as short and concise. They're a little bit more elaborate. And as a result of that, sometimes we just find out more information from the Brisa that we didn't know from the Mishnah. And sometimes it's, as we said before, contradictions and questions, and it helps them get a very clear picture. After all this amazing genius analysis, you get to a very sharp understanding of the Mishnah, the reasoning behind it, and so on and so forth. So this, you have pages and pages of deep analytical study that the Talmud does. That's how we know most of the brises. We know them because the Talmud is bringing the brise. There's also certain brises that were handed down to us, entire sections, like what we call Tesefta, and various different things that there is compilations of brises. But a lot of them, even though we don't have them, but we have them in the Talmud, because in those days they had them. And by the Talmud bringing them, we know what the brises are. So now we say like this. The Midrash says that the Mishnah is considered, since there are 60 tractates, they are the 60 queens. The Brisas are of a lesser stature. So just like when a king had wives, he had 2 types of wives: the wives that had full status of wives, and those that were considered less, they had less prominence. They didn't have so much pull and so much say. The king wasn't scared of them as much as he was from the other wives, right? So so they're like a lesser stature. They're the bride. Oh, so similar to that, we understand the brises don't carry as much clout, and they're not as high, have such high stature in Torah law like the Mishnah. And that's what it's hinting to. That's what King Solomon is hinting to metaphorically. He's talking about the Torah. What are the girls without it? Now, obviously, the girls who maybe hang out in the palace, or they're in the peripheral of the palace, like we said by Achashverosh, where all these girls were brought as potential. Later, he might select them and bring them into his palace to be one of his wives or concubines, whatever they will be taken to. They have far less of a relationship with the king because they're more distant. So what is that referring to? But they're not girls that are living in downtown. They are part of the royal I'm saying, entourage, or they're part of the royal facility of the empire, no, not the empire. The empire is the whole kingdom, but they're part of the king's world. So what is that referring to in terms of Torah? That's referring to the halachot and the teachings that are taught by the Talmud itself, not by the Mishnah. We're talking about two different generations. There's the early generations of, like, as we mentioned earlier, the rabbis who lived during the time of the last era of the temple itself. See, the Mishnaic rabbis lived in the end of the temple era, going to about 100 years, 120 years after destruction of the temple. This is the Mishnah period, probably about a close to 150 to 200 year period, from the early Mishnah Hillel to all the way down to the end last Mishnaic rabbis. Now, the Mishnah rabbis are considered of a far higher stature. We take their word with far more reverence than we do the next 2-3 generations, where they were the next 2-3 generations, let's say another 100 years, which were the rabbis of the Talmud. They're analyzing the Mishnah. So they don't have that, they don't have such clout in their, when they say something. We don't take them as seriously as we would take the Mishnah. They can't argue on a member of the Mishnah. A member of the Talmud can't argue. What he can do is he can explain, but he can't argue. But if he himself says a teaching and there's no one arguing amongst them, we that too becomes part of the oral law. So there's many teachings in the Torah that are called a shmaitza. What's a shmaitza? A hearing, in which Rabbah said it, Rabbi Nachman said it. I don't mean Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, Rabbi Nachman of the Mishnah, of the Talmud, or the Rav Chisda said it, or Rav actually is considered a little bit of a Mishnah, or Shmuel. These are shmaitzas. These are teachings that we heard from the rabbis of the Talmud, which are so their teachings are called these. And how many do we have of that? Without an end, so many. And these are the teachings of the Talmud itself. Now, later, after the Talmud, it doesn't have that status anymore. Mishnayos is Tanaim, and the Amoraim is the Talmud, and the Brises are Tanaim, also Tanaim. But then, as we said, they're not the ones those were not they're the same Tanaim, Rabbi Akiva, but it mentioned in the Brisa. The way it was recorded is not as serious as if it's recorded in the Mishnah, because basically the Mishnah is Rebbe. I'll put it this way: the Mishnah, the way I'm explaining it today, would be that the Mishnah is the edited version, and the Brisa is the non-edited version. So in any case where you have a non-edited version, like in the Rebbe Sichos, for instance, you have the non-edited version, which thousands of hours of recordings and speaks in it. Then there's the edited version, which went under the Rebbe himself. So you know that the Rebbe Mamish said, this is the way I want it to be taught, because he himself edited it for publication. So when you edit something, you sift it through many times. You make sure everything is accurate to the highest level of accuracy. So Mishnah is a higher level of accuracy, the highest, and it comes from the sages that have the purest tradition. Brisa are the same rabbis, called the Tanoim. We're dealing with the teachings from the same rabbis, but they're not they're the non-edited version. And then the teachings from those who analyzed it in the next 2-3 generations, they're of a lesser stature. Their teachings, and when they make a halachic decision or whatever it is, they're called shmaitza, or they're called halachot. And so in this, they're called the girls, which means basically it's like if you had 3 women, you'd say, oh, she's a queen, she's a concubine, and she's just a girl in the palace. But so now the Alter Rebbe is going to explain the great, amazing depth to this, because it's not just about stature. It actually means something very deep. Torah is where God dwells. God is beyond our We don't have access. Creation doesn't give us access to God. The world, even though through the world one can come to an appreciation and a connection to the divine, but a very, very, very watered down, filtered godliness is in creation. So watered down and filtered that it's considered absolutely to God nothingness. The godliness that's in the universe, that creates and sustains not just the physical world, but the entire cosmic order, is absolutely zilch, nothing. And that's the main theme of our discourse, where he's going to explain that, how it's zero. It's nothing. To God, it's absolutely zero. So by studying creation, even with a religious fervor and with a desire to get to know God through the creation, looking into the world, looking into the wisdom of God and the intricacies of how the sciences of the world works. Obviously, you can be awed and flawed by God's greatness, but you're not even beginning to touch who he really is. Where does God communicate himself to us? In the Torah. So the Torah is the vessel in which God. That's why the Torah is like a woman, just like the woman is a recipient and for her husband. So she's like considered the keli, the vessel, the makabel, the recipient for her husband's energy. The same is also the Torah is the recipient for God. Now, in that we say that in the Mishnah, God is very, very revealed. So it's like a queen who lives with the king, and she's very, very much unified with him. He's designated to live with her. A concubine is a level of wife. She is a wife. People know the king is. People know and appreciate that the king has intimacy with her, but it's quiet. It's not, in other words, when the king, in other words, with the queen, the king is not uncomfortable. The king is not at all, not in the slightest bit, uncomfortable walking, holding the hands of his wife. This is his wife. Everybody knows that they have a intimacy going on. It's not a question. She's married to him. The concubines, he visits her, but it's not open. It's not because she's like so she has, but again, everybody knows she's a concubine. So she's designated. It's not like, the king is hanging out, with just a prostitute. She's designated to the king. There's a certain level of marriage, but it's not, she doesn't have that royal stature, which means she's not as unified with the king. And then there are those girls that are, they don't even have a relationship with the king. It's just in the palace, just for the availability, if you might say, for the king. So the concept that the Midrash is telling us, based on what the Alter Rebbe is going to explain over here, is that the Mishnah, when you study Mishnah, the Mishnah itself, God is fully manifest in the Mishnah. Shishim, these are the queens. In the Mishnah, you have the pure Ein Sof, is fully vested in that Mishnah. So when you learn the Mishnah, God is completely revealing himself inside of it. In the Torah, and in Torah itself, there are different layers of Torah. There are parts of the Torah where the manifestation of God is more explicit, open, reveal. Then there are aspects of Torah where God's the presence of the infinite truth of God is there as well, but in a much lesser revealed and manifest level. It's there, but weaker. That's the brisa. And then there is the halachos where the Ein Sof, where God himself does not fully manifest it. Then we don't understand why we should be studying them. If they don't have the presence of the Ein Sof, which means God is not intimate with them, which means he's not vesting himself inside of this halacha. So why should we study them? He's gonna where that as well, but in terms of Torah, so that he's going to explain over here what the idea of these alamos ein mispar are, but we're going to get to that. The whole concept of Shishim and Melochos. What all this is going to give us is a very, very rich and incredible explanation of how to be excited when we learn Torah and how to learn Torah with the right intention so that we can be in this state of divine manifestation, that God is literally God that cannot be perceived, understood, and connected to, no matter how far, no matter how holy you are, no matter how much you climb, no matter how far you go in your sublimation and refinement and elevation, even if you purify yourself and purify yourself and purify yourselves to the peaks of purification. You study one Mishnah, you're gaining so much more access to God than all these purifications. Because in the Mishnah, God is fully manifest. But in order to feel that, not just to feel that, in order for that to happen, he's going to explain in the discourse, there needs to be a desire that when you're studying Torah, that you want to connect. You want godliness. It's possible that people study Torah just for the intellectual stimulation. And then it's not about a bond. You're not in a romantic relationship with God. And then not necessarily the connection is taking place. So that's where he's going to explain when you need to pray before you learn Torah. You need to daven. And davening over here is not praying. Davening, like someone told me today, the real meaning of davening is connection, not praying, not pleading, connecting. So through the connection and the yearning of the soul to experience ultimate unification with the Ein Sof, with the unknown, which is completely beyond us. When you want that, and that's the meaning of the verse. When the verse says, we said earlier, 60 are the queens, 80 are the concubines, and the girls without a number, what does it say afterwards? One is my bride. The one is my dove is referring to the connection we get when we desire the relationship. That's through prayer. When we are in a state of oneness, when we can come out of our fragmented existence, when we can pull ourselves up when we're stuck in the multiplicity of existence. And that's when we look at the world in its brokenness. When we don't see the oneness of God. But when we, through prayer, when we lift ourselves up to a much deeper place and we perceive God's oneness, and as a result of that, we drop all of our pursuits. We're not interested in this and that and that. We want one thing in our life, and that is our connection to God. Then when we study, then when we're learning Mishnah, we're in this level of unity, Bryce at this level, and so on and so forth. So let's read inside. That was an introduction to the Maimer. So we start now. Shisha Heimo Melochos, 60 are the Melochos. Shishim Heimo Melochos, 60 are the queen. Ushmainim Pelakshim, and 80 are the concubines. V'amar Azal, they have a copy. Torah Sheba'al Peh. V'amar Azal and the sages tell us, Samach Melochos, the 60 queens, Elu Samach Masechtos, these are the 60 tractates of the Mishnah. Shmoinim Pelakshim, the 80 concubines, Elu Abraisos, these are the Braisos that we discussed earlier. Vailamois, Koya Lalachos. And the girls that they was referring to is referring to the halachot. So what are the halachot? These are as we mentioned earlier, these are the Heino, and he explains Memris ha'amarayim. These are the teachings of the Amarayim. Amarayim is the name of the rabbis of the Talmud. They're called an Amoira. The rabbis of the Mishnah were called a Tana. The difference between a Tana and an Amoira. And we're dealing with a difference of people who were in an era closer to the temple. So they had a higher spiritual capacity. And once we went to exile, the souls also were diminished. There was a whole tremendous drop in terms of spiritual capacity. So just like in exile, the godly presence in the world is of a much lower level. God is hidden and concealed. So to the souls, the level of souls that are revealed in the world are of a lower stature. And that makes them on all levels. So the ability to understand Torah and to connect to its ultimate truth, the next generation is considered on a lower level. So these are considered the girls that are Hainu Mimras. These are the teachings, Amarayim, of the Amarayim of the Gemara. The Lashon Medrash Shir Hashirim. Now, in the Medrash of Shir Hashirim, it's a little different. Rabba, Shir Hashirim Rabba, what does it say? V'alamais ein mispar. The alamais ein mispar ein kates the Tosefta, to the Toseftos. Toseftos are additions, which are, in other words, there's Brisa, and then there is Tosefta, that which is like an added on. Exactly what the difference between Tosefta and Brisa, I don't know. But this is the idea that we're dealing with different stages of. Okay. We need to understand why is the Mishnah called a queen? Ubraisais Pelakshim, and the Braisais are called concubines. We know, so we need to understand Masha Kasa Betchilas Aseres Adibres. So to understand this, the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that when you're studying Torah, you're not just studying ancient documents which are speaking about the Torah law that God communicated thousands of years ago to Moshe. That's also cool, to learn a document that God himself, taught. This is God's will that he taught thousands of years ago. But that's beautiful. That's academic study. But then there is Jewish study, which is not academic study. Jewish study is, if you take a look at Jews studying, you'll see that they all shake. Sometimes there are people on YouTube who get upset at me and they say, "What's this rabbi shaking the whole time? Stop shaking. Talk like a mensch." Jews from the very early times, we shake when we study. This time when I teach them, by the way, I'm going to shake like I never shook before. Okay. So we shake when we study. It's called, in Yiddish, there's a Yiddish word for it. It's called shuckling. Okay, you shuckle. And the point of shuckling is the reason the Zohar actually asks the question, why Jews shuckle? We've been shuckling for thousands of years. Why do we shuckle? Because to us, study is not academia. It's not a dry academia. What's really happening is you're experiencing at that moment a communion with God, which means as you're studying, your soul is downloading divine energy and godly light. So when you're coming so close to this powerful, infinite life source, so there's the flickering, there's the intensity of it, and that's what caused. Now it's all subconscious. The soul feels this divine energy flowing, and it makes you shuckle. It makes like a flame flickering. So really, Torah study is the ultimate spiritual experience. Even though it's an intellectual, you're going through an intellectual analysis, but yet it's very spiritual, because you realize that even though the setting that you're talking about, whatever the subject matter is, it can be technical elements of financial transactions, legal transactions, which have to do with figuring out if the guy owes him money or doesn't have to pay back, and so on and so forth. There's nothing spiritual and godly about that, but you realize that it is all a metaphor for godliness and God's infinite wisdom and infinite will, which is one with him, is contained in that. And not only that, the same transmission that happened at Sinai thousands of years ago, we're able to access that because that's beyond time. So when we are studying Torah, we're actually tuning into something that's beyond time, that's happening currently while we're studying. That means God at this moment is communicating his will and his wisdom to the soul. And that's what creates this energy and this excitement. So this idea, and that's once we understand that Torah is not a dry analysis of laws, but Torah is a transmitting of divinity into our souls, a flow of pure godliness, of infinite energy and infinite wisdom that's flowing, godly wisdom, divine wisdom, which is flowing into our souls. We can understand why you're basically, and put it in other words, you're in an intimacy with God. And when an intimacy involves excitement, that's what intimacy is. So the Mishnah is intimate with God. The Mishnah is a queen. The Brisa is a concubine. There is a union taking place. There is a yich. Yeah. As what? Moedim. There's a yichud taking place. There is a spiritual union taking place. Right? So in order to understand this, he's going to say, let's understand a little something that says when God gave the Torah. When God gives the Torah to Moshe, it says that God spoke all these words. To say. So the Alter Rebbe asks the question. The Torah always uses the word when after a commandment it says God speaks to Moshe and he's lamar saying. Usually the word lamar means is that Moshe should repeat it and teach it to us. But by the giving of the Torah, all Jews were there. Everybody heard it themselves. Moshe didn't have to give it over. The Ten Commandments were spoken directly by Hashem to us. We heard it directly. So Moshe didn't have to give it over to us. And you can't answer that the reason it says lamar is because that we should teach it to our children and we should pass it on to future generations, because the sages tell us that all future souls, everybody stood at the foot of Sinai. So the 10 Commandments, everybody heard. If so, so no one has to teach it to anybody. We know it already. It's embedded in our souls. It was given to us. So what is the meaning of the word lamar? That idea is going to teach over here is that when God spoke the 10 Commandments, he spoken in a way that lamar, that we should reactivate that every time. Whenever we are saying it, it's the same revelation of Sinai. God is speaking. In other words, God activated the 10 Commandments, which include the entire Torah. They're the root teachings that include everything, all godly wisdom that's in the entire Torah is all in the 10 Commandments. That is an ongoing flow of godly transmission that continues on forever and ever. It's outside of the limits of time. And because of that, when any person who wants to tune in to Sinai, to the transmission of the 10 Commandments, all you need to do is take a Torah book, focus for a second, close your eyes, and you're going to learn the Holy Torah. You're going to connect to God, open up, start learning, say the words, and the download is taking place into your soul. We're not going to be aware of it, because if we would be aware of it, we would pass out from ecstasy and bliss. From the mere sheer intensity of such an infusion, we would not survive 1 minute. So for that reason, we don't feel anything, but we know that it's happening. That's the idea that he's going to begin explaining over here. The Gam Lahav, and so also to understand this, that it says in the beginning of the 10 Commandments, that God spoke all these words saying, since the 10 Commandments, the Jewish people heard directly from God, how can we even say the word lamar? We would understand when it comes to all the other mitzvahs of the Torah, where the Jewish people heard it only from Moshe. And Moshe is the one who heard it from God. So their lamar would mean, say to the Jewish people, lamar that they should give over. God said it to Moshe, that he should repeat it, and he should say it to lamar. Hashem is saying it to Moshe, and you give it over to them. But by the 10 Commandments, where all of Israel heard directly from God, we can't say so. So if so, what is the meaning of lamar? The Mishnahs in Tractate Sota has the same kind of question. The Mishnah is not. This is what the Mishnah means to be saying, is when it comes to when it says the Jewish people sang the song. This is 1 week earlier. It's in 2 weeks from now. We're going to have the Shabbos of song, where it says the Jewish people sang by the splitting of the sea. There it says too that the Vayomru Lamar, they said saying. So what is that word saying? Why does it have to say Lamar over there? Especially because everybody sang together. Everybody was singing. So what is the Lamar? To who is it being sung? To be said over. So the Mishnah then gives us 3 different meanings in the word Lamar of how the Jewish people said it. Either that it was repeated. Moshe said verse after verse and the people repeated after him, or Moshe started and they all said it automatic, whatever. But do you see the same? She'ain tamad loimer lamar. That's what the Mishnah asks. Why does it say lamar over there? Because in both those cases, everybody was there. Whoever needed to receive these words was there literally. So it's not like you're going to relate this later. So in order to understand why it says by the giving of the Torah later, we first have to preface Pirush HaPasuk, the meaning of the verse. It says in the book of Song of Songs, in Shir Hashirim, another verse. He opened up with the verse of Shir Hashirim, of Song of Songs, and now he's going to analyze another verse. It says, Koil Doidi. Here, we said before, the Song of Songs is a love story between it's a romantic piece of poetry or a love song where one is singing to the other, the husband, the wife, the man to the woman to the man. It goes back and forth. Who is talking? They're in love with each other. They're infatuated with each other, and they're speaking about each other's greatness. And so, in the part that we just learned, it was the husband speaking about the wife. It was the king speaking about the prince, the queen, or he says, there's so many women in the palace, there's so many in this, but I only have one that I love. In the earlier part, another part of the Song of Songs, it's the woman speaking about how crazy she is about her husband. So in that case, she says, Kol doidi, but the voice of my beloved is coming. I hear you coming. You're skipping over mountains. She's watching him come on a horse from a distance. And he's coming. So she says, Kol doidi, no, she's not Kol doidi, Kol doidi, the voice of my beloved, Hine zeba. I can see you at a distance. You're coming. Behold, he is coming. Medaleg alaharim, he's leaping over mountains. Mekapetz alakvoitz, hopping over hills, skipping over hills. So, what is this referring to? Again, all of Song of Songs is a metaphor. So this is referring to the giving of the Torah. Israel is talking about how God appeared to us by the giving of the Torah. It was at that moment that we realized that the voice of my beloved is coming. Because God appeared. And the main thing by the giving of the Torah wasn't that God appeared because we didn't see him, but we saw his voice. Because the sages actually tell us that we didn't just hear the voice, the sounds, we saw the sounds. So when God spoke the 10 commandments, we were able to see the words coming out of God's mouth. And that's what it implies in this verse. It doesn't say Dodi is coming, my beloved is coming. It says the voice, simply it means the sounds of my beloved. I hear the galloping horses. I hear the sounds of the hoofbeats of the horses that indicate that my beloved is coming, jumping on the mountain. But according to this, the meaning is no. The voice of my beloved is coming. Those were the words of the Torah that God was transmitting. It was coming to us. So Koil Doidi, Koyal Matan Torah. This, Song of Songs is describing the general relationship that God has with Israel. The different verses are referring to different eras and different experience and different times of our romance. From the beginning of time, some of it is talking about the going out of Egypt. Some of it was talking about the hard times in Egypt while we were still in Egypt. Others were talking about when we came into the land of Israel. Others they're talking about the exile, the various different things. So Koil Doidi Koyal Matan Torah, it's referring to the giving of the Torah. Kiba Matan Torah Ksiv, because by the giving of the Torah it says, all the people saw the sounds. They cited the sounds. So this is literally Kol Dodi, the voice of my, and whose sound was it? The voice of my beloved. And that's what it means. It's coming to us. Usually God's voice is unperceivable. We definitely can't see it. We don't see any sounds, but we can't even hear it. And over here, we're able to see it and hear it. But the Alter Rebbe stops on the idea or notices that the verse doesn't say, the voice of my beloved, you came to me. You came. It says, Koil Doidi, you are coming. It's speaking in the present, as if this event is taking place now. But he's asking, how it was thousands of years ago. The giving of the Torah is an ancient event. And the answer is, it's not an ancient event. The giving of the Torah is a constant. The voice of God can be brought to each and every one of us into our souls whenever we're studying Torah. That's going to be his answer. But let's see how it develops it. And this that it says in Ezebah, behold, he is coming. This is implying that it's happening currently. He doesn't speak in the past. That is because. Because in truth, this voice is coming to us even now, currently, right now. At all time. And at bechol ace, at every bechol ace bechol zman, at every time and at every occurrence. Sha'adam yoyshev oisik b'Torah, that a person sits and occupies himself with Torah. As a bav and nimshach oisei akoil atzmoi shahaya be'eis matan Torah. The very same voice, the exact same, there's no difference. The very same voice that the Jewish people physically heard in their bodies at the time of the giving of the Torah, that very same voice is now coming to us. The only difference is their physical bodies was able to behold it. Now our soul, not our physical body, subconsciously we hear the same voice. You know, from God's end to us, there is no difference. The same godly revelation is taking place. It's only by the giving of the Torah, it happened in the physical universe that our physical senses was able to register. And to most of us, in our physical senses, we can't. Unless you're the Baal Shem Tov or someone like that, you can actually see it when you're learning. You're actually seeing and feeling the word of God flowing through the coming in the Torah. So that very same voice, Shahaya Beis Matan Torah, that was at the time of the giving of the Torah. Ikish Moshe is bar lekamon im Yirtz Hashem, and like will be explained soon im Yirtz Hashem. He's going to explain. This is where the mimer is going to explain. Ulahavin kol zen, to understand all of this. The gam inyan medalig alaharim, and also to understand the idea where it says that God is leaping over mountains. What's this leaping? God came. What's the emphasis that he's taking a leap? That when he's coming to us, he's leaping. Simply, it's because he's so excited to come to us that he's leaping. Like someone runs somewhere and they're running with passion, and there's some obstacles that they don't have time to walk around it. They just jump over it. Yesterday, the chassan that we were by the chasana, it was so beautiful that the chassan, and he was excited. He put his brother in front of him, and his bride was sitting on the other side, and he was dancing, and he ran, and he leaped over his brother. And it was like I was sure he was gonna hit him on the head, but he just totally managed to go completely over his head. Like, it was really cool. And I saw that his bride was very impressed from the leap. In any case, but that's literally see, we had a visual because we learned the mimer tonight. The Eibishter was giving us the visual yesterday. He showed the chassan, and we know the chassan is God. Every chassan is a physical manifestation of the giving of the Torah. That's what. So the fact that I saw this yesterday, I never saw this, that a chassan come running and leaping over something to his collar. Oh, I got to tell him. Leaping over towards his bride. There's an obstacle. His brother is in the way. Sometimes a brother can get in the way. Understand? He leaps over his brother and he's and he lands like in front of his bride. So it's literally the replay of God leaping over the mountains to come to us. Yeah. So now what is the meaning of that? But the spiritual, that God is what is he leaping over? What's the idea of the leap? And basically where he's going to lead us to is that creation, heaven and earth, with all its expansivity, imagine the size of the universe, endless and galaxies. It's just ending. We have now all these new telescopes that are like where we're able to see into deep space, and it's like endless. And yet, with the enormousness of it and all of existence, it's absolutely created from nothing. We say yesh me'ayin, created from nothing. God didn't invest even a nickel into it. Not even a penny of himself into it. It's created from such a minuscule energy of God that's not even called a penny, not even a crumb. And therefore, all of existence is absolutely naught. So can God manifest himself? God himself, who's above it all, reveal himself into this nothing? There is an infinite divide between true existence, which is God, and this somewhat, happen to be existence. It exists because God created it, but it's from the ultimate perspective of truth, it's absolute nothing. So how can this nothingness receive the revelation of God's truth as he really is into the nothingness? And especially when we're not the whole universe, we're just a tiny little speck on a speck of a speck. So how can we small little tiny earthling creatures on planet Earth that are at the very, very one time to be a recipient of God himself revealing himself to us? For that, God has to leap over this infinite divide. God has to do basically an impossible move. And that's the awesomeness. That's the awesomeness of the love. I don't think my dear Hassan who jumped over yesterday can do it every day. But on his wedding, he was with such adrenaline. He pulled from such a powerful place that he went, and he knew it. He felt it. He was able to go over. It's God's love for us that is such intense that it activates the impossible, that he transmits himself to us, despite the fact that the gap is not bridgeable, and yet he does it. So let's read inside. But in order to get to that, he's going to go through a lot of what I call pure Chabad Hasidus. He's going to go through a long explanation that's getting very, very intellectual and very philosophical in the relationship of how where the worlds derive their existence in terms of the relationship of creation to God. So let's see it, which we have in many discourses. And sometimes when you learn these discourses, you think the Alter Rebbe says the same thing in many discourses. It's not the same because there's always chidushim, and I didn't get a chance to really analyze this in a real deep way. I hope, and therefore, when I was reading it earlier, I felt that like the concepts were still beyond me, and but maybe we learn together. Hopefully, it'll come to us. No. There's obviously some of the teachings that he's teaching that he repeated at different times and different settings, some basic principles. He didn't write this. These Maimarim, Tanya, he wrote. These Maimarim, he said, and different throughout the years, and it was recorded by Kaiser. The Indian and the idea is, let's read it. Oh, no, I'm sorry. So in order to is Lahavin calls it medalig alahar. We have to understand what is the concept of leaping over mountains. Tzarich Lahavin. We need to first understand chila inyan ishtalshalos. The whole concept of what the Kabbalists referred to as a chain-like progression of evolution of worlds. So we spoke about before about the universe, but this is all whatever a telescope can see is not spiritual existence. It's all physical. What we can see, what we can perceive in our when we look out into the world, whether it's Earth or beyond the Earth into outer space, it's all part of a physical existence. But the Jewish mysticism teach us that there are higher levels of existence, the other worlds that are beyond our senses, and which we can. And these are spiritual worlds, which every world, and here's the thing: the physical universe is the most limited and the most constricted of all worlds. Beyond this physical world is a spiritual world, and the spiritual world is so much cooler than the physical world in terms of its energy, in terms of its power, in terms of its enormity. And the creatures and being that inhabits those worlds are beyond the scope of us being able to see, touch, feel, and pick up in our senses. But they are magnificent, and each one of them are types of creatures that are way beyond our capacity that we know. And that world is also just a minuscule, tiny world compared to a much higher world that precedes it. When we say preceding it, don't mean preceding it in time, but preceding it in level. And so there is a whole chain-like progression that goes on and on and on and on of worlds upon worlds upon worlds upon worlds upon worlds upon worlds that are stacked higher and higher and higher. And this is what we call the order of evolution, in which one world evolves from the next. Okay? So we have to understand this concept and how it relates to Hashem himself. The Hine Ksiv, because for behold it says, B'chol chachmei hagoyim u'b'chol malchusa me'in kamoicha. There's a verse that says, you probably in your sefer that you have, this one over here has, I didn't make copies from the one that I'm learning from. We'll see where this is from. Oh, it's a pasuk in Jeremiah, Perek Yud pasuk, verse number 7, chapter 10, verse 7 in Jeremiah and Yirmiyahu. What does it say? And all the wise men of the nations, and in all of their kingdom, there is no one like you. So simply it means that who can compare to you, God, amongst the wise of the nations, and all their kingdoms and all the empire, with all the wise men of, no one like you, God. That's the simple meaning. The Zohar, however, learns the meaning of that verse does not mean that if we're trying to find someone like you, God, amongst all the wise men, that's obviously, compare any wise men to God, a human being, a mortal human being, and lives in time and space, is going to compare, and that we have to negate that nobody, that Albert Einstein, no matter how smart he was, he's not God. It's a silly negation. So the Zohar explains that it doesn't mean that there's no one can compare to you. What the verse means is that in all the nations of the world, and in all the wise men of the nations, and in all their kingdom, they all know me'en kamocha, there's no one like you. So we're not talking about that there is no one there like God, because everybody agrees, if they're wise, and in all their kingdom, there is an understanding that God is God, and He's above the understanding of everyone. Fine. Now, it would seem, therefore, to imply that you don't have to be Jewish to be flawed by God being awesome, or high, or big, or great, and incomparable. No one can compare. However, there is another verse where King David explicitly says that your wonders, God, that you're complete, you're beyond, you're like beyond, there's no comparison to you, is something that is revealed to us, Eleinu, to us. So it would seem to imply that the Jewish people in particular have a sense of God's incomparability and and God's wonder much more than the nations. So, which one is true? In one place it says that everybody agrees there's no one like you. And in another place it says that Israel knows that there's no one like you. So he's going to explain that when we know there's no one like God, there is knowing there's no one like him, and then there is the ultimate understanding of what it means there's no one like him. It's a whole different level of understanding. And that is something that is a wisdom that the Jewish people were given, which at the time of biblical scripture, it was something that the nations did not, even those that were great philosophers and thinkers, and they thought about the relationship of God in the world, they had a certain limitation in the way they perceived God. That's the main idea he's going to explain. They saw God as the primary cause of everything. But the primary cause is cause and effect, has a relationship. And those things evolve with cause and effect. So since things evolve with cause and effect, the first cause and the final effect, even if it's a gazillion causes and effects, they still have a relationship. Because this causes this, and A causes B, and B causes C, and C causes D, and D causes E. So ultimately Z and A also have a connection. So we can't say it's like there's no comparison at all. That's what he's going to explain. But the Jewish people have a tradition. And therefore we were taught a steep secret that God is not the highest possible existence from where all existence comes from. But God's existence is not the highest. He's outside of the realm of high and low. It's an existence that's completely not possible even to talk about how, what, where, when. He exists with a non-existent existence, and therefore, with a billion, even if he was to create a system of his light dimming and diminishing, even infinitely, we will never arrive to a creation. God can never evolve into creation, even through it. He creates it, but he remains infinitely above and beyond it. And therefore, even though there is a concept of ishtalshalut, of evolving energies, that's once he creates and he establishes, then within that system that is already created, there is an evolution. But from him to the worlds, there is a total, an absolute, and unbridgeable gap. There's no that was a Jewish understanding of God. What would the difference be? I'm sharing with you some deep secrets from deep understandings later. The difference would be if you learn that God is the highest he's the primary cause of everything, then he's naturally closer to the more spiritual realms because there's a system. And then you would come to a conclusion that he doesn't care so much about the silly little things down here. Whether you eat a ham sandwich or not, you're not going to ruin God's day or make his day if you're going to do that, because God would care about something so petty. Hashem would care about something so silly, so narrow. God is so high. But you're going to agree that, but something of like major significance, something that is going to affect, that God would care about. That means that your perception of God is that what? That he does have a relationship to something, but this is too far from it. Judaism say that God cares about what to us would seem like the most insignificant, tiniest little thing. Whether you move this on Shabbat, you move this and that, you're violating God's will and you're upsetting God if you're doing that. So how's that possible? What kind of God do you have? The answer is, if you have a God that's outside, that is infinite, has no relationship, then so it's just what he tells you he cares about. There's nothing more meaningful or less meaningful. The most cosmic things are also zero. Nothing. We don't understand. He transmits to us and tells us exactly what he likes and what he doesn't like. And there's no reason even to think that someone who saves a billion people is any bit more significant than someone who fulfills God's will by doing the tiniest mitzvah. Like, why is a billion people more significant than any mitzvah? The whole realm is really infinitely insignificant. It's zero. Yet it's because he decided that he wants a relationship. And if he decided he wants a relationship, he can be infinitesimally small in the same way that he can relate to that which is infinitely big, because he's outside even the realms of infinite. The concepts of infinite and finite, all this is all part of the scheme of a scheme that we live in, that we don't even know what's outside of that scheme. But we know one thing, that he spoke to us and he revealed himself to us. And he told us exactly that you eat the piece of chicken 5 minutes before the 6 hours are over, he's very upset. And if you waited 5 minutes longer and it's 6 hours, now okay. And that's it. So this idea, that's why there was always an argument. Jews, to live a Jewish life means to take God seriously in all aspects of the nitty-gritty little things of life. You have to understand, what's the philosophy behind it? You say God really cares. God cares of the tiniest minutia of smallest things. There's a pasuk, there's a verse that says, I'm going to bring already one of the verses that he brings later. There's a verse that says, Ram al kol goyim Hashem. We said it today in Tehillim, in Hallel. We say it every day actually in Yechavod, but today we said it twice. When we said Hallel in the morning, it was Rosh Chodesh, Psalm 124. It says, Ramach Goim Hashem. God is exalted over the nations. Simply, it can be a compliment. The nations exalt God. They say he's high. Ala Shamayim Kivodo. On heavens is his glory. Faith is a heavenly experience. They say God's glory is in heaven. But then we continue, we say, but on earth? But we say, Mik Hashem Elokeinu. And then these words, Mik Hashem, who is like God, our God, the way the Jewish people know God. Hamagbi'i l'shaves. He sits so high. Therefore, Hamashpili lirot. He lowers himself to see. Bashamayim uba'aretz. Heaven and earth is equal to him. Because heaven is also nothing. The billion gazillion celestial beings singing to him all day with boundless love and the highest levels of purity are just as insignificant as a stone. They're all equally nothing in front of him. If it's nothing, it's nothing. No, he chooses with free will, without anything opposing him, to want a relationship with us. And he tells us exactly to the tiniest detail of how he wants us to live. And that's why Judaism is so caught up with the physical practices of living a detailed moment by moment in all aspects of life. There's always something in Torah has to say about the right way and the wrong way. And we can understand why those people who didn't want to have someone messing with their choices every minute, but rather letting them live to do whatever they want, would rather have a God that doesn't care much about what's happening on earth. So they thought they're elevating God by saying that what? They looked at the Jewish people with scorn. They said, you guys are thinking, what are you doing to a God? God cares? What are you making? We think God is such a narrow... but we're realizing over here that the ability of him to care on earth is actually from an infinitely higher place than to think that he's relegated to heaven. Because by nearly saying that he's relegated to heaven means you're seeing him as somewhat within the framework of higher and lower, more something closer to him or farther from him, from within the limited range, or yeah. Let's read inside. Yes.
So when you say that Hashem cares so much about the world, the details, because he cares about us, but Hashem gave us the Torah, and the Torah is very wide and spread. I think with the Dukim of the Arafat, we show how much we love Hashem.
Both.
Because the Amorim and the Tanaim, they're the ones who wrote it.
Yes. Yeah, but they figured out what God wants. That wasn't.
We showed how much we care about
Yes, about every little nuance of his words, for sure. It's both ways. But Indian, that's why we say Kamayim Panim El Panim, when there is a deep love, so it goes both ways. The Hinek it says again, it would seem to imply that even the nations agree that there's no one like you, God. However, King David, up him is a piece of Amar, he says, Rabbi Sasisa, God, you did so much. Rabbi Sasisa, or rabbis can mean you did a lot, or it can mean great things you've done. Rabbis can also mean big things. Asisa, Ato Hashem Elokai, you, God, my God, you've done amazing things. You've created amazing things. Nifla Isecha, your wonders, Umachshav Isecha, and your thoughts, Eleinu, is revealed to us, that there's no one compared, there's no comparison to you. So it would seem to be implying, you see, the question the Alter Rebbe means to ask, that Eleinu to us, which is referring to Israel, to us it is revealed how there's no one comparison to you. But there's another verse that contradicts that says that everybody agrees there's no one can compare to you. But the question is, when we say can't compare, how do we understand? Is it an absolute in comparing, or is it a relative in comparing? The way the nations understood it was all within a certain relativity. The Inyan and the idea is the hine be'emes, because in truth, gam chachmei umois moedim beLikutei yisbarach. Also, the scholars of the nations agree that there is a divine being. There is a first cause. And this is the meaning of b'chol chachmei hagoyim, in all the scholars of the nations. Me'en kamocha, there's no one like you. Upirish b'zohar, the Zohar explains, like I mentioned earlier, the Zohar explains that kavana, the intention is shegam hem yoidim, they too know she'en kamocha, there's no one like you. However, they say they say that the creation is in a manner of evolution of cause and effect. That the way God created the world is that he evolved from God. The Yadua, and it is known, to every cause, yesh erech v'yichus ima olol. Every cause has some kind of a relative connection and there is a certain equation you can make between the cause and the effect. They have a relationship. It has some kind of erech, a value, the yichus, and an association ima olol with the thing that comes out of it. It might be lower than it, but you evolved from me, but I'm much bigger than you, but you still have a significance. Al derech mashal, and he's going to show us how we can see how causes and effects all have one thing is connected and attached, and therefore impacted by the cause. The cause is impacted by the effect because they're not. They're yeah. In a human being, we're going to find within our own evolution within ourselves how energy moves within ourselves from level to level. So there's a higher elements inside of us. For example, our intelligence. It's the most supreme power in the human experience, our intelligence. And then below our intelligence are our emotions. So the emotions and the intelligence, the emotions are called effects of the intelligence. Because it is what we perceive and know as reality that we get excited about. Right? And therefore, in accordance to a person's understanding, that will be their excitement. So if you're learning, you understand a lot about Mashiach, for instance. Yeah, what? Chabad teaches. That's a primary teaching of Chabad, that you put your Chabad in a good place, in a godly place, then your Midas will follow. In other words, even Chabad Chasidus wasn't interested in the Chabad. Chabad Chasidus was interested in the heart. Rahman Alibabaya. Hashem wants the heart. But how are you going to take a heart that naturally gravitates to the material world and turn your heart into a godly heart? So if you're going to fill your mind with godly understanding, then automatically, right? So that's why the Rebbe, for instance, said that we shall study a lot about Mashiach. The Rebbe wanted us to be excited about Mashiach, because when we're excited about something, we drive that energy. So how can you be excited about Mashiach? If you study about it, you'll know. If you don't know about it, just know every Jew believes. One day it'll be. The more you study, the more you understand what the content is, what is the meaning of it, and therefore you want it so much, it creates the chukka, the longing. The more you become familiar with something, the more you desire it. There's so many things in the world that I haven't read about and I'm not excited about. So many things in technology that are coming out which would make my life so much more convenient if I would know about them. I don't know about them. I didn't read about them. But I read about them and done research and gotten this catalog, gotten that catalog, and understood how this works and what it is, I would get excited about it. I would want to have it. And I would maybe save up some money to be able to figure out how I can buy that. And I don't care because I didn't learn about it. So whatever you expose yourself, your mind to, that's what you will create. So you see, emotions follow the mind. Also what you fear. There are people literally walking around with fears like of major economic collapse that might happen soon. They're predicting. So people who are busy reading the Wall Street Journal all the time or whatever and read and hear about all the analysis are literally scared. They say some people that think this year, 2024, we're going to see a headline, a crash. And literally it's creating anxiety by people. By me, it doesn't say number one, I have nothing to lose. But number two, I don't because I don't follow it. I don't read about it. I don't know about it. It doesn't create fear in me. So it's where your understanding is. That's where that as well. Because that's on a more physical plane. That's more immediate. You see something, you want it. But there's also on a deeper level, it's what you appreciate, what you understand. And that's why he explains that you have, for instance, an adult is excited about things that are more mature. And children are excited about foolish things, little things. What changes in the adult and the child? But what causes the emotion? Their intelligence. When you get older, you have a higher understanding, appreciation. The little toy car. Now you want a Lamborghini because your mind grew. The little nourishes silly cars, the trucks that you're playing with is small. But when you were a little kid, that was like amazing thing. The intelligence of a 2-year-old is like going crazy of this helicopter because it has a little flashing lights. It's like crazy. The kid can be dreaming all night long and weeks that he's getting a helicopter because his mother told him that for your Hanukkah present, you get a helicopter with lights. And he's going crazy with excitement. As you get older, even just 5, 6 years old, or 7, 8 years old, the helicopter is least important, but then other things take its place. The mind grows, the emotions grow. So even though intellect is a level of a form of life and a form of energy that precedes and is before the emotions, but they dictate the emotions and they evolve from the intellect, evolves the emotions. Now he's going to show us how there is one evolving from the other, but the emotions are still, there is a relationship between the intelligence and the emotions. And the intellect as well is impacted by the emotions that come from it, as he will explain. So, because that's the way cause and effect works. So if you understand God as a very, very abstract energy, you might say, as a very abstract being, but yet from him comes another energy that came from him, and from him comes something, and eventually a world evolved, the spiritual worlds, and finally the physical comes into being through one process of evolution. Oh, the truth is, you can't explain the first being in a cause of it. As the first being has to be outside of the whole system. Yeah, that's what that's a Jewish thought. What? Yeah. And then, but they don't have an explanation on that first. I'm saying, but they don't have they don't have an explanation on the first being, actually, right? Okay. Yes. Al derech mashal ba'adam, by way of analogy, by a person. There's intellect and there's emotions, and then it goes further from a person's emotions. What happens? What evolves? Thoughts. Because what you're excited about, what does it do? See, there are a lot of excitements that we have that are just dormant. That means if I remind you about something, you'll get excited about it. It's something that you had a hobby maybe 2-3 years ago. What? No, not you. No. But there's a lot of things that we do have desires for, but we haven't paid attention to them recently. So they're out of sight, out of our thought, out of our thing, and therefore, but it can be re-triggered again because the emotion is there. But what happens when the emotion flares up? The emotion triggers. How does it manifest? It creates thoughts. In other words, because you're essentially excited about something, that's why you're thinking about it. If a person is excited about the possibility of making a lot of money through a certain business, so that will, even when they're not in business, they're just doing whatever they're doing. The thoughts keep on pumping in their head because the thought is being driven by the emotion. So the thought is an effect. The cause is the emotion, and the effect is so the intellect causes the emotion. The emotion is then driving, and its effect is the thought. And from the thoughts, it's possible, but not always, but it usually could happen, is what you're thinking about. You'll talk. That's what you speak to people. So thought then becomes the ilah, the siba, the cause for the speech. And so it goes. So he shows you intellect, emotion, thought, and speech. These are 4 levels of interconnected energies where one evolves from the other. And they all have a relationship with them. You can't say that the emotions are completely insignificant to the intellect. Completely insignificant. That doesn't work that way. As we'll see. Okay, let's read inside first. And every single one came into existence from their other one. When one contemplates in one's mind, this creates, when a person meditates or thinks about something, this creates the emotion. To do kindness, or the like. Now, even though the midah, the emotion, is a byproduct of the intellect, but it's not the substance of the intelligence. It's actually very different. Intellect is calm, and emotions is heated. Emotion is excitement. And they're very, very different character of energy. The more the intelligence, the more calmer the person is. The more the emotions, the more that's right. But they still have a relationship one to the other. In accordance to the quality of the mind, of the intelligence, how it is and what it is, so will be the emotion, in its revelation. Let's say, for instance, if it's an intelligence that's driving kindness, in commensurate and in comparison, or in conjunction, if you might say, with the quality of the understanding of the intelligence. Because, for example, you can have three philanthropists, everybody having a different philosophy and a different understanding of why philanthropy is an important thing. And you can see it in the nature of to who they give, for what causes, with what excitement they give, how much they give. And a lot of it has to do with their philosophy in giving. There's a philosophy behind it. There's an understanding. There's an appreciation. So the level of appreciation that's driving the kindness will show in the kindness. You can analyze the kindness and get an idea of what kind of an intelligence produced this kindness. So you see that one is flowing into the next. And therefore we also find that a minor, a child, their emotions, their drives, their wants are for foolish things. According to the poorness of their mind, meaning their unsophistication of their intelligence. And an adult who has a broader mind, mayaspan, the very same things that are driving excitement by a child can even cause an adult and a mature person to be disgusted by it. Like it's not at all appealing. So like it says, in accordance to a person's intelligence, Yehulal ish, a person is praised. Ish are the emotions. What he's saying, he's not just saying a person is praised. Ish is within a person, the ish part is ish. The root of the word ish is ish. So it's referring to the emotions which are fiery. So lefi sichloi, according to a person's intelligence, Yehulal will be praised. Also, Yehulal means will shine, ish, their emotions. So from a person's level of emotions, you can generally judge what their level of intelligence is. The emotion of love, or the emotion of fear, or the like, is in accordance to the tonight is Reb Zusha's yahrzeit. The holy Reb Zusha. So the Alter Rebbe, right? So Reb Zusha was known as someone who can look up to the sky. Went outside, looked up in the sky. The Alter Rebbe once related about Reb Zusha that he went outside, looked up on the sky. It was a bright, clear sky. Maybe it was like in Los Angeles after a good rain, like we had, and suddenly everything is as blue, as complete, as clean. All the pollution is like gone for a few days. In the winter, we only have it such crisp, clean blue skies. So he went out and he looked up in the sky and he saw the clean stars. I mean, the sky and the stars. And he was so overtaken with the magnificence of the Creator who created us all. And he suddenly felt so tiny and small and insignificant in front of an awesome, infinite God, that it hit him so strong that he got literally an upset stomach for days. He was sick because it like he couldn't handle it, the intensity of the thing. When the Alter Rebbe said the story, and the Alter Rebbe was basically saying, and I know what I know, and that me doesn't affect as much. And when the Alter Rebbe said it, he suddenly dropped the cup or dropped it, or his hands were shaking, and the fear of Hashem hit him like very, I don't know what happened, something like, but you see that, do we fear Hashem in any way? Do we tremble? These people had hasaga, they had an understanding. To them, it was, God was very real. They had the sensitivity to feel Him, to know. We have other fears. Well, we fear. Yeah. Now, number one, the intellect produces the emotions, and therefore, in accordance to the intellect, so will be the emotions. Another thing, the idea, the intelligence, the energy of the intellect, which means the intellect, the power of the mind, it itself encloses itself into the emotion. One energy vests itself in the other energy. That means that an emotion needs to have a little bit of reasoning inside of it that is the backbone of the emotion. When the reason of it completely is not felt in the emotion at all, when the intelligence, when the emotion doesn't have the explanation going along with it, then the emotion can disintegrate. So sometimes you find yourself loving somebody or something and you forgot why you love them. But usually that love, unless it's an essential emotion. In other words, let me put it this way. There are certain essential relationships, like a father and a child, a parent and a child, and very deep bonds between siblings and people that are, and as we should be loving each other as Jews, because we really are siblings. So these are innate emotions, which the emotion doesn't need a reason. The emotion is, this is the nature of the emotion itself. However, on a level where a person got started, and many times, when you suddenly find something that you become passionate about and get excited about, but then for whatever reason you stop focusing on it, as we spoke earlier, and you can't, and then at a certain point you don't even know why you appreciated it. It's like a certain type of literature, for instance, that you were once very crazy about, and you dropped it because you went on to other things. Maybe you go back to it years later and you go, eh. And when you go, you can take those it's like you have things in your house that are sitting there and you once treasured and you had it and you never threw it out. And then you say, and you take it and you toss the whole thing out. How did that happen? It's because there's no emotion there anymore. Why? Because the reasoning that was once there that made it significant, maybe you grew in your mind and now you appreciate things that are bigger and smart, because you were exposed to higher things or deeper things or more meaningful things. And what you once thought was so meaningful and so great, like I had an experience over here last week that shattered my heart, but even I had a little less feeling towards it. What happened? For years, I've been giving out CDs. I used to give all my classes that I did on Tuesday, and I would create a CD. And I would put them out around 500-600 CDs of those lectures, of those talks, and around the whole community. And it was in all the grocery stores and all the shuls, and hundreds of people listened to the Shir, weekly Shir. But then CDs went out of style. So I stopped doing them. I lost a big audience because people would just pick them up in shul. And I never was able to figure out how to way to get to these very same people without the CDs. Because online, okay, there's thousands of classes, but a guy picks it up in shul, pops it into his car or in the grocery store. Anyways, I had literally from maybe over 10 years every week. So we had hundreds and hundreds of CDs. And it was so much work to produce them every week. I put my soul both into preparing the class and then producing the CDs and the distribution. So we stopped doing it a few years ago, but I had boxes and boxes of CDs that are like my memorabilia. They're here. And this is like my soul. A chunk of my life is in these CDs. My wife is cleaning up over here and she needs the space. And she's like, no one needs, what do you need? You have 100 CDs in this class. What do you need it? So over the last 2-3 years, she tossed them. Every time she used to take them, says, you're throwing this out. We need that space. It's the children's room. The kids have to. The last box she threw out 2 days ago, like she said, no, I got to. She wasn't going to do it if I wouldn't. She wouldn't tell me I'm throwing it out, but she said, listen, we got to throw this out. But I told her that, 2 years ago, if you'd have thrown out this box, I would have fainted. But now I'm already a little bit disassociated with the CDs. It's an older thing. I didn't just recently put my soul into it. So the fact that the whole big box of 300 or 500 CDs went into the trash can over here. But it's on YouTube. Yeah, I know it is. Yeah, on a certain way, it was also, but there was something that, so but what you see, but what you do see is you get very emotionally connected to things, but there has to be a reason that's there that energizes that emotion. When for whatever reason the reason is no more anymore, then it collapses the emotion. That means that there is a little bit of the intelligence that's in the emotion. So the emotion is not 100% the emotion. Inside the emotion, there is intellect. Now, intellect really is above emotion, but some of the intellect goes into the emotion. It's like a chain. That's why it's called ishtalshalut. Just like a chain, the higher link, even though this link is primary in the chain, it's above, but the lower part of the higher link extends into the lower part of the chain, and they hook up like this, which tells you that there is an interlooping and a connection between them. All he's doing over here is that if you're going with the system of evolution, there will always be a connection between one level and the next level. And therefore, once you connect, you can connect A to B and B to C. And even though you'll argue that E and A are very far, but they're still connected because one connects to this and connects to this. In other words, if I'm your brother-in-law and this is your cousin and he's your neighbor, I can have all three over by me for Shabbos for the meal. Why? Because you're my neighbor and you're his cousin and you're his friend who came to Shabbos. So that this person would never end up at my Shabbos table. But because like this, and we know with Jews, for instance, it doesn't take more than 3 minutes of conversation, no matter who you meet, that you're gonna find out, oh, your neighbor, I knew your aunt, I knew your uncle, she was we used to be friends. It doesn't take. Yesterday I met someone at my wedding. In 2 minutes, he was related to, I never met this guy. In 2 minutes, my father did business with his grandfather, and my father, and then when he met my wife, suddenly it was a whole new relationship with her family. So crazy. You call it Jewish, what does it call it? It's called Jewish geography. Not geography, geography. It's that connection. So our connections are very strong, but you can connect the link. And if that's the case, even if you're going to have God evolving into creation, then there will always be a relative distance between God and the world. So let's see over here. The gamma seichel, and also the seichel, mislabish achekach b'amida, encloses itself into the emotion. How to do the kindness. He's adding the intellect. Remember we said earlier that you have different philanthropists with a different understanding and mindset on why they should give. Okay, explanation of why they should give, depending on the intelligence, will be the decision of how to distribute the money, to what causes, and to how much, to what, where, and when. So you see that the intelligence is, now they're giving because they're kind. There's a kindness. A person who's not kind, who doesn't have kindness in their soul and doesn't like giving, you can have all the philosophy from today till tomorrow. The emotion isn't there. Nothing is going to come. There needs to be a kindness. But the intelligence vests itself in the kindness, and it becomes the navigator of the kindness itself. And this is the idea of cause and effect. That the effect has a erech value, the yichus, and an association to its cause. And just like he showed it to us in intellect versus emotions, he's going to take it to the next step. How emotions and thought also have a relationship. Because the emotions actually enclose themselves in the thought. And the thought goes into the speech. And each one comes about one after the other through a chain-like progression. And therefore, and that's why one is impacted by the other. When things are part of a chain, if you pull the bottom link, you're also pulling the top link. So there is they have an effect one on each other. There is a change in the cause when it becomes enclosed in its effect. It's not on the same quality or in the same level as it was before it enclosed itself. Like when you're contemplating something that's driving you to a certain love, to a certain ava. Hold on one second, let's finish the thought. When you're contemplating, when your mind is invested in a certain relationship, in a certain, so the mind is now enclosed in this particular thing. At that moment, you don't have the ability to be able to contemplate and be free, like you said to me earlier. When we got rid of the CDs, you said you're free now. So the intellect, when it gets caught up in driving an emotion, and it's actually in the lane of the emotion, it's driving an emotion, it's at that time not free to be at a, let me put it this way. When Albert Einstein had a romance, I don't know his romantic life, but if he was caught up with a girl or whatever it was, and he was involved in courting her and something like this, at least during the time that he was investing in it, he didn't have the free space for in the same level of complete openness to be an abstract, complete abstract thinking. No, I'm saying because intellect gets caught up a little bit in the emotion. If it's producing an emotion, it gets confined. So there's a change. Because to put it this way, before he met someone that was kind of, that there was a love being produced. Before he met this, he was just in a world of academia, of ideas. But now when he got caught in something, his mind is to a certain degree, and he's using his intelligence. What? It's a certain appreciation. It was an appreciation. It was intellect. But the intellect is now, his intellect now is on a lower level. It's in the realm of justifying an emotion, justifying a love, justifying as opposed to being very lofty and very abstract. So there's a change in the entire intellect when it's getting caught up in that which it's affecting. Like we said earlier, the bottom of the chain is actually in the space of the next link. So that, and therefore it changes the intellect. And the same is when an emotion goes into a thought, it's limited more in the thought as opposed to the emotion when the emotion is still free and not confined in the thought. And thoughts, when you have to put them into speech, are also already compressed and less free, because thoughts are more powerful. When the thought is now particularly in certain words, they limit it, and so on and so forth. So let's read it over here. When a person contemplates a certain love, so the intellect is now enclosed in it. You're not able to contemplate us in the miskal, in abstract thinking. Because the seichel, the intellect, is now enclosed is now vested in the emotion. Nimtza comes out. Yashinoi b'haseichel. There is a change in the intelligence. Lamasha ha'yetchila b'fnei atzmai. For the way it was on its own. B'tzior ha'miskalois. In its tzior, in the form of its intelligence. Because it became more on focused on it. It entered the range of emotions as opposed to being more obeying. And initially it was bitzir hamaskalis. It was more philosophical and distant and removed, and in a world of pure academia. And then afterwards, you're putting your intellect into. It's just like when you put your intellect into if I give this example many times. When Einstein's knob broke and he couldn't find a locksmith to open his door that got jammed, And no one locksmith was there. So he started in using his mind to figure out a engineering of how he can get the door open. So I'm sure, being the brain that he had, he was able to figure out a pretty interesting solution and figure it out. But it's on a much lower level of intelligence than when he's sitting on his paper and writing his thesis. Wait, so it's now condensed into something, into chachma of an action. But while he's thinking it, because he's not God, while he's thinking it, he doesn't have the freedom, because if he's putting his intelligence in, if he's just, if a person is just, what's it called again, doodling while you're thinking, is a different story. But when you're putting your intellect into something, you're confining it into that particular thing. So the same he's saying is regarding intelligence and emotions. When intelligence is driving an emotion, it's becoming fixed in a relationship, in an emotion, not in its free state. And so it is in every cause and effect. You have to go. Yeah. Yeah.
Even the most basic of emotions.
Yeah.
Person
What is it again?
even the person thinking of the basic emotion.
Yeah.
I would say it's driven by fire or attraction.
By what?
Even the most basic of emotions.
Yeah.
Fire or attraction.
Tired?
Tired. Being tired. Being tired.
Being tired.
Tired.
Yeah.
Attracted to something.
Yeah.
I was thinking, how could that be intellectual? It's obvious. If you tell this person she's your sister, the attraction goes away. If you tell the person there's $1 million, just wait up for 1 more, the tiredness goes away. Even the most basic of emotions
Yes.
are really driven.
There's always information. There is an information. There is knowledge. There's information in the emotion. And the information. Yeah.
We're always taking shit.
Mm-hmm.
That's why
The emotion gets so messed up.
Once it
Yeah.
enters the
Yeah.
emotion, it catches it. There's no degree of separation. All the intellect, that's why when you write how to get into broken door, at home, it's a lot easier to do when it's cold and hungry and tired.
Mm-hmm.
Even the most basic of emotions are really driven.
Yes. Yeah. That's true. There is always some seichel to every emotion. That's why he didn't say that children have emotions that are non-intellect. He says they have a childish intelligence, but there is always an intelligence. Mm-hmm. Yes. Let's read a little further. Since the world and the creations came into existence from God's thoughts, since we know that God causes the creation, He created the world. Now, in the actual Chumash and Scripture itself, it says that God created the world through speech. And the Mishnah explains that 10 utterances the world was created. In the Zohar, you have sometimes that God thought the world with machshava, with thought. So these are various different levels of creation, whether with thought, or a deeper level of creation is creating it through thought. The more external level of creation is creating it through speech. But since the worlds are created from thought, and it would apply to speech as well. One would be able to entertain. Chas v'shalom, God forbid, that what? Since the worlds were created by divine input of God's thoughts, and therefore we would try to imply the same idea that applies in our experiences to the way God is thinking, which would mean that just like when a person is thinking a thought, they're frozen in the thought. The person is now, because the intelligence drives the emotion and the emotion drives the thought, and they all vest one inside each other. So the one so that means that in any experience, there is an investment inside of it is contained higher levels, and the higher level is now kind of closed in to that particular thing. and therefore is changing by whatever the thought is. He's now locked in this. So we would think that since God creates the worlds through thoughts, in the thought there is the divine emotion, in the divine emotion is divine intelligence. That means that God is kind of frozen in creation, and like there is a change in God by the creation that he created. Why? Because we would think because they were also created through a progression of cause and effect, and according to the understanding of the sciences, or they might say the philosophers of the nations, hakadmoinim. He's talking about the early philosophers. Aristotle. I'm not knowledgeable that much in Aristotelian philosophy, but and this comes King David, all of Hashem, to negate that. And what does he say? Rabbi Sasisa, notwithstanding the fact that you made much, you made all these levels, and you made these gazillion, they're unbelievable, right? But ein aroch alecha, all of them, they have no comparison to you, which means kikola oilamois, because all the worlds ein payalim, they don't affect shum shinui, any change whatsoever. Bo yizbarach and Hashem. And as we say, how do we know this? We would never have figured this out. We know this from what? Because we have teachings. In other words, this was transmitted to us by God. Like where, for example, there's a verse that says, and it says, Atahu achaloi nivra olam, the Atahu, we said in our prayer, you are before the worlds were created, and you are after the world is created, which simply, like, what are we saying? You were before. Obviously, if you're God, you were before the world. If you're the creator, you got to exist before the world is created. And we would think that just because the worlds were created, you were canceled. God ceased to exist because he created the world. It doesn't make any sense either. So the emphasis in this prayer is not that God is before and God's now. Thank you. What it's really saying is, Atahu. You are the same exact before the worlds were created, and you're exactly the same after the worlds were created. There isn't the tiniest change in who you are. It's not like suddenly you got occupied and caught in the creation, in the happenings of time and space. You remain completely above it, as if it's never happened, as if the entire creation is a non-event. It doesn't mean that he's not controlling everything that's happening. He's controlling everything that happened, and at the same time, he's above it as if it never happened. There isn't even the tiniest dent inside of him, of movement, of him being caught up in it. So that's the idea. You are exactly the same after the worlds were created. Bishave equally, belishinui, without even the slightest change. And there's a verse for that in Malachi. Gimel Pasuk Vav. What does it say? Ani Havaya Loi Shanisi. Ani Hashem, I, God. It mentions the Tetragrammaton, the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And God says, which is the whole theme of this week's Torah portion, by the way, we have to connect it to the Parsha, that God is introducing to the Jewish people, Ani Havaya. Actually, he says that what is God saying? To the forefathers, he didn't reveal. He only revealed Kel Shakai. But to the Jewish people, he's revealing Ani Hashem. It's actually God as he transcends all worlds, where all worlds are absolutely meaningless to him. That was not revealed to the forefathers. They were connecting to the godliness that is interacting and interwoven in creation. But Hashem's truth, as he is unaffected by everything, was not revealed to them. But in Torah, it is revealed. Because the Torah, in Torah, God is making himself accessible to us from the place where creations don't exist. His truth as he is, from his silent place, where there is absolutely no disturbance and no movement and just an absolute him. That him in Torah is Ani Hashem, that's being given to us. And that level of Ani Havai Lo Shanisi has not changed from creation at all. The Heino, and the reason for that is Mishim She'olamos, the worlds, Ein Aroich Klal, all of creation and all the worlds don't have any erech, don't have any value at all. Lahaboire Yisbarach, to the Creator. Now, you would say, to God's essence, to God himself, the worlds are, but the energy that he emanates to create, the force that he emanated, that does get caught up. So you'll differentiate. To him himself, he's above it all. But to his creative energy, that because it's creative, if it's creative means it is meddling in the world. It is entering into the creation to create, to sustain, to make, and to whatever. So he's saying, no, even the energy that he emanates to create is in a state as it's almost like it's an energy and it commands creation, but it commands and it remains absolutely above what it is commanding and what it is affecting, what is happening because of it. Unfazed and untouched. This is later we're going to see that there is a level that does get involved. And that's called Memalakal Alman, the indwelling light of God that actually does get involved and does contract itself to the creation. But this level that he's talking about now, an energy that produces creation in a way that it remains as if nothing is happening. Completely aloof, and yet it's the main power that creates Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing. It brings the world into existence from ex nihilo. That energy remains, that's called Seviv Kalam. The Zohar refers to it. That it encompasses all worlds equally. And to it doesn't make a difference if it's creating a piece of sand or it's creating the most sublime, brightest star or brightest angel or brightest, most intelligent being on the most highest level of intelligence. They're equally nothing before it. And they're equally the same nothing. Not like, you can't, this is that. No, absolutely. Same in its nothingness. Not just to him himself, but even to his light that he emanates for creation. As he says, and he calls it over even his thought. The thought that is the power that powers creation, that thought is unchanged by everything that's happening, by the entire cosmic order. And even regarding the life that is drawn to them from his thought. So then how do they come into existence? They come into existence through a gap. There's like a leap. It's not like he rolls into them. That's not what he doesn't evolve into them. They come into existence through there's an infinite distance between him and them. While I don't mean distance in space, he's everywhere. But he doesn't lower himself down as he's creating them to them. He remains in his infinity and his loftiness. So it's almost like, that's why it says, it's almost as if they're created on their own. It's as if he is not occupied in creating. It doesn't say bara. It says nivra. It happened on its own. And they're coming into being is through a leap, the tzimtzum and a contraction, and not in a manner of cause and effect. Chas v'shalom. Like will be explained. And therefore they are all considered as literally non-existent, even though he creates them. To him, they are a non. They're a non-entity. Because what does it mean? When something is important to you, is because there is some, if you might say, investment of yourself in that invested interest that you have. There's a piece of you that is. But if there's nothing to it, then it's nothing. Now, this doesn't mean that God doesn't want the world. He chooses it, and he chooses to have a relationship through Torah and mitzvahs. We're talking about the worlds as they are without the Torah and without the mitzvahs. The world as it stands for its own intrinsic value. It is absolutely meaningless and nothing. And therefore you can't say that the heavenly creatures are more entertaining to him. And therefore, the more spiritual you become more connected to him. You don't become more connected by becoming more spiritual. You can climb the ladder of spirituality from now on for all in infinity and keep on going higher. You're not getting one iota closer to him because he's outside. The only way you get closer to him is by being silent and listening to what he asks you to do. That's it. And he might be asking you to be kind to your neighbor's cat. And by doing that, you're connecting to him. Because he's outside of the entire system. That's what we're saying. He's beyond the system. And he tells us in Torah what he wants us to do to be connected to him. So we can't use anymore the measurements that we in our mind, we ascribe value to things that are more spiritual or more abstract or more things, because that's all the scheme that we live in, the rules that we live in, this entire world of intelligence and reason and cause and effect. It's all a certain construct that we're built around, but he's outside of that whole construct. And his relationship to it is infinitely and boundlessly above it. There's no connection at all. And yet he chooses to be in a relationship with us through fulfilling his will. So now the only thing that becomes important is, what is his will? And it might be blowing an animal horn on the first day of the month of Tishrei. What can that possibly mean? He asked you to do it, so you do it. And you're connected because it's his will. And obviously it's something about him that we don't know, mysterious, that this works. It works for him. I don't know why. For some reason it works for him. The animal horn. And if you use the wrong horn that the sages tell you it's meaningless. Even though you produce so much nicer music from it. But if it's not the one that the sages tell you is kosher, then it's not his will. So it's not his will. It's an act. It's not a divine act. It's not God's interest. It's part of the world. It's nice. It doesn't connect you on any real way. Hold on. No. To God, the significance of all the worlds is exactly the same. He uses the word mamish like before he created them. Before he created them, imagine there is no world, there's nothing, there's absolutely nothing. What's the significance of the world that wasn't created? It's not, because it wasn't created. It doesn't exist. I'm not saying that he's thinking already of creating it. It's not. So before it was created, before it even existed, it has zero significance. He's saying exactly the same as after it was created. It's very hard for us to imagine that we create something where it occupies us, where whatever we produce, anything we produce, there's a piece of us that goes into it. And here, it's not. And this is the meaning of King David's the verse that King David says, your wonders and your thoughts, Eleinu, is to us, Pirush, meaning like this, through your wondrous energy. Niflasecha means your wondrous energy. And your amazing thoughts. Eleinu is what's directed to us to create us. Right? Pirush, through Hashem's thinking, it creates his havos v'shtalshalos ha'olamos. It brought about the coming into being and the evolution of all worlds. You made a lot, ata Hashem Elokai. God, my God, you made a massive production. And where is it all coming? From your wondrous thoughts is what's producing it. What does that mean? But that the multitudes of worlds and creations, they all came into being through God's thoughts. But nevertheless, they have no significance to you at all. What does that mean? That the coming into being of the worlds from his thoughts Einoi b'pchinas ilavi olol is not in a matter of cause and effect, which would make them significant. There is a complete and absolute cutoff to the thought that's thinking them. That beings them and enlivens them from nothing to something. We'll finish Perek Aleph. Let's do another few and then it continues. David HaMelech, King David continues, and he says, "Agida v'adabeira atzmu mesaper." What does that mean? I will relate and I will speak. It's too much to relate. I think it means if I will try to relate it and count it, if I would try to tell and to count or to relate the wonders of creation, it's too much. That's the simple meaning. But according to the deeper meaning that he's explaining over here, Piddish, since God is infinite, and therefore, if God would not have created in the manner that we are told earlier that he creates, where his thoughts create through a quantum leap, which means there is an infinite divide between the creative energy and that which is created, to the point that there is no connection at all. If God would not create that way, but instead would use the method that the way we invest, which is more like an evolving, our energies evolve from level to level, and God kind of would allow himself to flow into the universe to create. Since he's infinite, then infinite never ever turns, if it's expressing itself, if the infinite is expressing not with, see, what we're learning is really that God creates, but through a withholding. He doesn't allow, he's not leaning in when he's creating. He's leaning out and yet creating. If God would be creating by leaning in, which would mean that he's expressing himself into the creation, since he's infinite, then we would never get to finite, because infinite doesn't produce finite. It would just be, maybe it would evolve as evolutions because he can produce, but it would always have that divine, the infinite, the infinite, it would always have the infinity. No matter how far it would go, it would be infinite. And since we have what's the result is finite creations, limited creations, and the entire time and space and everything is in a finite structure, and it's coming from an infinite being, means that there is a leap. There is a certain point where you can't draw the line, where you can't make the connection. As he says, if the creation of the worlds from his thoughts would come through a chain-like progression of cause and effect, the creations would not be in a state of limitation, vitachlis, and end, as they are now. Then everything would be in an Ein Sof state, and without an end. And this is the meaning of atzmu misaper. What does that mean? Atzmu misaper means there would be too much to relate. They would be in a limitless state. So I guess the way it seems to be saying, if it would be spoken in terms of a continuation from God, then atzmu misaper, it would be boundless. It would be infinite. His connection to us is in a way of ein aroch, not in a manner of cause and effect. The Tzemach Tzedek puts in a footnote, and he says like this, that is one level. Agida, the truth is the end of the pasuk. Agida v'adabera is that there is a level where God does invest himself in creation. That's called Shechina. The Shechina is God after the quantum leap. So it's not like that after he takes the quantum leap, it's just creation and no godliness. God takes that leap as well and enters into, and on that level, yeah, he does change in his involvement with us. That's the level of Shekhinah. And on the level of Shekhinah, you can say she's in exile and she's impacted by by whatever happens in the world, and the higher levels and the lower levels. And so that's called Mamala Kalam. But for that to happen, that's called Agida Va'adabera. I draw God, Agida, and that's Otzmu Misaper. In order to be able to come to a level where godliness is already within the framework of creation, for that it required infinite amount of an endless contraction. Atzmu Misaper. There's too much to count of how diluted it needed to become, like we're learning in the other mimer, on the 5-minute mimer that we're talking about. There was a tzimtzum arishon, a first absolute withdrawal, a reemergence of the infinite light. Because if you try to get the oirin sof shaliftei atzimtzum, that's not possible in any way from there to creations to come into existence. So the soviv. So there's two levels of energy of God. The primary force of creation doesn't mix and doesn't mingle into the creation. It affects the creation from the outside. When we say from the outside, means creation is a non-event, even though it's creating it. And we have to say that that's the primary force of creation. Even though there is an indwelling light that does get invested, that's not the primary. Because the indwelling light has already been morphosized into the range of finiteness. That's how it can have a relationship with the finite world. And it can get caught up in the finite world. And if it has a limitation, or at least it's operating with limitation, it can't produce something from nothing. Because something from nothing is an infinite power. So the Mamala Kalalman energy that we're going to see later does exist. It's the level of Malchut, the lowest one of the divine attributes, called Malchut, that does get invested in the creation. But Malchus would not be able to create Yesh Me'ayin, something from nothing. Because of what? Because of its, it already leaped over that, it stepped away from the infinite power. Now, but on the other hand, we know that Malchus does create. The whole energy of creation comes from Malchus. The answer is that's Malchus being plugged into the Orin. That's the interaction of the Mamala Kalalman with the Soviv Kalam. In other words, the indwelling light is really still connected to, although it goes through this quantum leap and manifests itself within the framework of creation, it's still powered by the Soviv Kalam. She receives her energy from the Soviv, from her husband, from the level called HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and through that power tree. But from this perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Soviv Kalalman, which is the encompassing energy, it's the main power that brings existence into creation, but in a way that it remains utterly aloof, above and beyond, so much so as if creation's never happened. Not as if. It's mamish to the point that nothing ever happened. There's no worlds. It's totally above it. And God exists on all these levels simultaneously, obviously. Hold on. The first half of the pasuk, that there's an ein aroch, there is a unbridgeable gap and an utter insignificance. That's regarding the encompassing light of God, the encompassing energy. Like we say later in the explanation of the word kadosh umuvdal, the meaning that we say that God is kadosh, he's holy and separated. But for the ha'ara, but for the radiance to come into the worlds, al zeh amar, that's the mamala kalam in a lower level, agida v'adabera, for it to be drawn from me to be able to, I think it means for us to be able to relate it and to be spoken of, which is a godliness that we can relate to. Atzmu misaper, there is no, it's too much to count. Count what? Hatzimtzumim, the contractions. Ribei revavos madreges, myriads of levels, adei mispar, that there's literally no number, until a ray could be enclosed in the worlds in a manner of real enclosement that we discussed earlier. Where humans do things and we become enclosed in the things that we do. Let's lead a little further. I'm not going to go much further because I don't have the I think the energy or the understanding to be able to read the next piece. But let's see how much we could do, maybe another 1 or 2, 3 paragraphs. It is for this reason that the sages were so meticulous in their wording when they referred to God. They call him B'Shem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu means the Holy One, blessed is He. Why are they emphasizing it? This is a rabbinic phrase to refer to God as HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why did the rabbis? It's not scriptural. Why did the rabbis choose that? Because that's emphasizes how aloof and unchanging God is by everything. Kadosh means removed. That's what we're saying. He's removed from whatever He's creating. I know Shu Kadosh. He is transcendent, umuvdal, and separated mikala olamais from all the worlds. And the world and everything that happens in it don't affect in Him any change. And the reason is because they don't have any erech, any value, or any association with Him Himself. This is the meaning that the Zohar says that God fills all worlds and He surrounds all worlds. Surrounding doesn't mean He's surrounding, He's far away, outside of the whole sphere of the worlds. We kind of look at the worlds as inside a circle, and He's hovering around the circle from the outside. That's not what the sages mean. The meaning is not it doesn't mean that He's just surrounding the world like a circle, like something the outside of a circle. Because we have a verse that says in Jeremiah and Yirmiyahu, heaven and earth, ani mole. God says, I fill the heaven and earth. I am everywhere. It says, Raka Inyan, what does it mean? What it means is that the primary influence that God is having on the world is considered like outside, meaning it's not being enclosed in us. It's above us while it's out. You can't even say that it's here, because that implies here in terms of spatial, that He's in time and space. He's not within the context of time and space. Yet, so there can't be anything where He's not, because He is. He exists with absolute existence, so there's no, his existence is not relegated to one place or another place. And whether we call that place time and space, it's not within that. He just is. It's just that we're not capturing His existence in our existence. Our existence is not capturing it. He's not in any way being defined by us and by our shapes and forms and definitions. He's completely outside of it while He's creating us. So in that sense, we say He's creating us. The energy that is producing us is completely, is utterly above and beyond us in every way. Yeah. The influence from Him doesn't come in a revealed state in the worlds, like cause and effect on now, like we said earlier, because in the evolution of cause and effect, in that case, now He's going to show it from the other side. See, we were speaking the whole time how the cause is impacted by the effect, but it works the opposite. The effect, because the cause leans into the effect, as we see in a chain, it's revealing itself in the effect. For that reason, the effect knows the cause. Might not know Him entirely, but it has a sense of the emotions know the intelligence that where they come from. They have somewhat of an understanding of it. So the angels, for instance, the Rambam speaks that there are 10 levels of angels, where the higher angels are the source of the lower angels, and so on and so forth. So the Rambam says each angel understands and appreciates somewhat the angel above it, the forces that are higher than it. So even though they're higher, they're in a world above it, they have an understanding where they come from. They know they have a appearance, so to speak, in a different realm. But that's because when things evolve, you can estimate from who you are, you can estimate somewhat the power that's behind you. But if God is creating from behind an infinite distance, so we can't know him at all. What he's basically showing us is that intellect and our minds are useless absolutely when exploring God. Because you can't imply any rules. Because all these rules of intelligence, all these basic laws of the mind are all within the system of existence that we know. And we can only work with our mind, but that, yes, you're supposed to find Hashem in the system, for sure, within the system. But yet we have the humility to understand that there is that really God is outside, and that's what we're yearning for. We want to get to know that beyond the block of where reason and intellect can't go. And that's exactly where Judaism begins, where Torah begins. That's where God comes in and revelation comes and Sinai comes and mitzvahs come in, because they give us a bond with what's beyond the whole realm of reason and systems and so forth. Because in the evolution of cause and effect, the cause knows and apprehends has somewhat of an understanding in his cause. And the reason for that is, and what does it cause? When an effect knows its cause, it's humbled by its cause, and it wants to serve the cause. It doesn't want to upset the cause because it knows that I'm hinged upon you. So it's almost like the bread chain. It's like an employee who knows that his parnasa, his paycheck is getting paid by the boss. So he has a certain humility in front of the boss. So even if the employee decided that right now we're going to play this kind of music in the office, but when the boss comes in and he knows the noise irritates, instantly he'll shut it, even though he really wants to hear it, because he doesn't want to offend the boss, because So whenever you know that you are dependent, and you have some understanding of that causes a surrender. It causes but the fact that the worlds, the creations, feel themselves with such a yesh, with such beingness, and they're not surrendered to their source. I mean, we in our consciousness, the physical world for sure, but even even the higher worlds that are surrendered to Hashem, they're surrendered to the godliness that's Agida v'Adabeira. Beyond that, they're not bottled to, because they have no sensitivity to it at all. So the godliness that's Lamaila, the Soivev Kalalman, doesn't cause a bittul in the creations, because there's no sense of it. It's completely outside. Is nullified to him, surrendered to him through this understanding. What that means is that the influence of the cause in the effect, is completely revealed to its effect. Which isn't the case by the creations. In comparison to the light and the energy that influences us, from the Infinite One, to bring us into being from nothing to something, the power that's being us into beingness, is not understood by us whatsoever. We can know that there is a force, but we can't know anything of the type of what that force is. We don't know anything about it. That's the very reason why the creation can be so preoccupied with itself and can be so self-sufficient, and in a sense, God forbid, become so arrogant and so disconnected. Yeah, that's the irony. It's so crazy. Yeah. Yeah. But in general, material world is in a state of there, when we say that they know, doesn't mean it's a knowing with knowledge. It's just that they're following us. It's following a system that the Hashem created. Yeah. You can go against it, yeah.
Person has a part of him that has no relation to the other person next to it. That has no creation. They're really the idea that we're able to rebel a chachma. The carrot doesn't say, I want to be grass.
Yes.
I'm living my life. I'm living
Yeah.
the best life. A human being that has the same knows that.
Yeah.
That's
That's true also. Yeah. Machmas, yeah, Machmas has to say because of this concealment. Now, so here, what happens now is because of this great distance that separates between God's truth and our truth, is that now we end up with a conflict. What's the conflict? We take ourselves seriously from our perspective, as if there is like something very real to us. But from God's perspective, we are really nothing. We're everything when we fulfill His will. All creation on its own is nothing. Besides the neshama mitzad the fact that you're chelik l'kamim al mamash. But I'm not talking that. I'm talking about the creation itself. The neshama is not part of creation. Yeah, oilama, the world, time and space and everything that's in it. It's absolutely nothing. Yeah, guf, not just guf, everything, including all spiritual worlds as well. Malachim, everything. No, they don't have neshamas. That's a piece of God. No, only neshamas, only souls. Yeah. The real truth is the way Hashem sees it. Kula kalach hashivi, all before Him is not. Nothing literally. And that's the level of Soviv Kalam. Shashpa mimenu yizbarach, that the influence from Him comes, ba b'bchinas hester, comes in a manner of concealment to us. There's no opening. There's no cross passing of information between these two. There's no bridge. Because if it would be in a state of revelation, the worlds can never come in. As we spoke, everything would be Ein Sof. So worlds would not be able to be. Everything would be in a state of Ein Sof, as we said earlier. But in truth, so that means there's no place to where He's devoid of Him. So He's everywhere. And therefore, in that level of truth, He cancels all of existence into absolute nothingness at the same time while He creates them. Like before the worlds are created. So we are both yeah and no at the same time. And right, and that's why He's called HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's Kadosh, meaning He's removed above, even though He's everywhere, removed of everything. But is removed from the world. And the creation. Now we have a deeper understanding what means yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. Because the meaning over here, what do you mean from nothing? From Him. If He would be creating us by kind of flowing into us, who He is and what He is would be like flowing into us, then we would be something from something. But since the way He creates us is in a manner where the godly remains outside of us, and we pop into existence with our definitions inside His space, but we pop into existence. So you can't trace it. It's like, so what are we created? It's as if we don't have a source. It's like we're a sourceless existence. He is the force, but His force is not part of our existence. It's as if it's outside, although it's our everything. Because without the force is the substance of our entire existence, but yet it's above our substance. It's not revealing itself in the substance at all. Because the light and the energy that's enclosed in the world. Now, there is somewhat of the divine energy that we mentioned earlier that does become enclosed and does reveal itself in the world. Because had we not had that indwelling light of God, we wouldn't even know there is a God. We would have no clue. The fact that we do is because there is a ray of a ray that does kind of pass the leap, past this bridge, and cross over to reveal itself. And that is sensed in the world. And that's what the angels feel. And that's why they're surrendered. And that's why an animal, you say, knows his master. And that's all already the post-leap light and energy. But that's the nether, that's ayin. That's ayin to Hashem. It's nothing to him. It's not even, you say, one cell. If to us it's everything, and to him it's nothing. That's right. It's not even a, yeah.
I'm looking at it from your perspective.
Yeah. The Heino she'ikir is savas ha'olam, but the Alter Rebbe is giving you God's point of view. The Heino she'ikir, he wants to pick you up and say the Heino she'ikir is savas ha'olam, because the main coming into being of the worlds, who are you? They midas malchusa yizbarach is through the Ebershter's malchus. K'mayim yachid chayalam and melech Heino she'be'emes so yachidim yukma goviz chayalam. Because okay, now at this point is where he is going to start introducing us to the Mamalach element. Meaning we were talking all till now that there is a great, it's not Ila va'olol, and there's a complete removal and infinite separation. But here he's going to reveal to us that there is what we might call the very tail end of God, not because it has a tail end, but because he decides to become invested in us in a way that we could know him, creation, other than Torah and mitzvahs. There could be a relationship with him, but not with him himself. That would mean a manifestation of his, and he refers to that as God's power of kingship. Now, kingship is a very external feature, because kingship in a person is the way others will refer to you, to have a relationship to the outside, which a king can have a powerful, an empire, and the entire empire operates completely. He has incredible power. He runs a tight ship, and everything is under his control. He rules, and he has, but yet, and therefore puts him in a relationship with an entire kingdom. And yet everybody in that kingdom, no one knows him. They know him as the governing ruler, but they don't know him. They don't, he's behind closed doors, so they never sat down like today's days. Every macher, every knacker, everybody gets an interview. You sit down, and we're going to interview. We want to know about you don't interview the king, because the king is closed. Now, to get to know his intelligence, his emotions, we're talking about when there were kings that were really, so there was a separation. So that's the idea. God himself is above and beyond all the sphirot higher than Malchus. Our soiviv kolalman are beyond, there's no knowledge in them. Malchus is from where creation takes place, from in a close level, not in a distant. In other words, creation is really created by the distant light. But there is a certain place where God does influence in creation by getting up and close with the creation. That's only the Shekhinah, Malchus, which is only a ray of a ray of a ray, as we spoke, that only was produced after 1 million contractions. And not 1 million, infinite contractions, that there can be a relatable ray which does enter the world. And that we might call is the God of creation. The God that we can know from creation and relate to him. But it's all one God, really. It's the two sides of Hashem. And that's why we refer to him as HaKadosh Baruch. Baruch means to draw down. Kadosh means remove. These are the two dimensions in HaKadosh Baruch, which is the Baruch is more the energy of Shekhinah, which lends itself into the creation. Kadosh is removed. But the whole mimer is what he wants to explain is that the whole inyan of Torah is to make a yichud between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shekhinah. Which means that notwithstanding, in other words, without Torah and mitzvahs, the creations are forever stuck within the construct of limited existence and finite existence, and they can never They have nothing because you can't use your mind to explore beyond, because your mind and the entire system of intelligence, the whole system, not just your intelligence, the whole concept of intelligence, it's all part of a construct of definitions. And he's outside of it. And therefore you can never bond with that. And that means you can only have a relationship with Shechina, with Melochos, not, and that's what we say about the angels. Kvod Malchuscha Yemeru. They speak only about your kingship. Beyond you as a king, they don't know you. And because creation can't know it. That's where this whole mimer is going to show us about the romance that we spoke earlier. That's why we got excited in Shir Hashir. We say, Koil Doidi Doithek, my beloved himself is coming. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the one completely removed beyond that we know nothing of, and he's coming to reveal himself to us. We're in Torah and in mitzvahs. And he's going to show us that every time you're learning Torah, you're studying, you're saying the Mishnah, you're stepping outside of the range of Shekhinah, and you're opening to the Sov of Kalalman, and you're allowing the Sov of Kalalman to speak through you. You're going past, you're opening up a pathway in this infinite gap that there is between the Sov of Kalalman, between God's true self into us, and you're allowing him to speak inside of you. And you're just sitting quietly and listening into the thoughts of God himself. And that's why, even though the subject matter might be about tomatoes and potatoes and about an ox and that's a camouflage that God, because he wanted us to be able to get it, he speaks to us a language, but embedded in there are his deepest secrets that we don't know, that are just his private self. That is, when we say his private self, his true existence that only God knows are these teachings. And what that tells us is that we have no idea what we're learning, but yet we have the schus to learn it and to understand it and to make it part of us. And when we understand it, even if we're understanding it just without the spiritual side of it, because we'll never know when Mashiach comes, we will, but eventually we'll know. But all this time of learning, we're learning it on the external, but yet we're understanding it. So what's happening is it's merging with our heads. It's becoming one with us. And that's the marriage that's taking place between God himself and the Jewish people. God is becoming joined with us. His very self with us. That's where this mimer is going to go into the awesomeness of Torah study. And then we'll understand there's a difference, however, between the way that's revealed in the Mishnah and the way that's revealed in the Brisa and the way that's revealed in the teachings of the individual sages of the Amoraim. This point of this is to get you excited about Limud Torah, to learn Torah with a tifa, with a yeah. Yes. Huh? What? Yeah. And how do you have a relationship with Hashem? Yeah. And including understanding the awesomeness of the relationship, because this can. No, but if you do understand, no, yeah, because Shlomo HaMelech said, David HaMelech says to Shlomo HaMelech, Da, no, as Likutei Avicha, know the Father, the God of your father, v'avdeyu b'leiv shalom. And then you can serve him with a complete heart. So the knowledge, the knowledge brings to a complete heart. The more knowledge of this we take in, the more appreciative we begin to become of the significance, like of Torah, of learning Torah, of learning a Shir, of going, because there's a struggle. There's a whole lot of other things that are taking our heart. And we drop everything. If this one mimer really registered, if a person learned this mimer 1,000 times, and it really clicks, it would create within a person a situation where they could not put down a sefer. They would not pay attention to anything else but Torah study. And when they learn another mimer explaining a mitzvah, they would get involved and obsessed with a mitzvah. Yes. Anyways, we're going to stop over here for now. And because we're going to leave this part about Melech for the next year. Yeah. Short recess. We used to taka learn the whole night. Remember, we did on Lag Boimer. We went to the freezing mikvah, but now it's not the time to do so. Okay, beautiful. Yeah. No, we're having a